What's up, everyone? This is DR with the WoW Breakdown 101, and coming in the next installment of Raid Battles of World of Warcraft history is another request from the community. In this series, we pit some of the toughest bosses during content against one another to decide which was actually the toughest boss. We will go over 7 rounds, with each round having a set category to decide which boss was the toughest. Round 1, we are going to take a look at the strategies of the boss to decide which strategy was the toughest to learn. Round 2, we will take a look at the single target damage abilities and determine which pose the most threat during content. Round 3 will be the most dangerous raid-wide damage abilities. Round 4 will be which boss during content was harder on the DPS row. 5 will go to which boss was hardest on the tank row. 6 will go to which boss was harder on the heals row. And finally, round 7 will go to the boss mechanics, which was the hardest for guilds to master and learn during progress. And today we're going to be seeing one of the most storied bosses in World of Warcraft history faced off against himself, and I'm sure this boss was one of the most talked about bosses in vanilla raiding. No, this boss was not in Nax. I am talking about the last boss in Blackwing Lair, none other than Nefarian, and his opponent during Cataclysm. With the repeat of Deathwing on the loose, we saw a return of several vanilla raid bosses, and this was no surprise as his opponent, the last boss in Blackwing Descent, none other than himself, Nefarian. And right now, I tell you, vanilla has a poor track record so far in these battles, as it just seems Blizzard is always pushing the newer raid bosses' difficulty to the limit. Can this raid boss stand the test of time and be the first vanilla boss to pull off the win? Well, we shall see. We're going to be taking a look at the Blackwing Descent 25 heroic Nefarian fight, as a lot of the 10-man heroic fights in Blackwing Descent was broke at launch of Cataclysm. Now let's get underway here in round 1, as Vanilla Nefarian is laying his strat out first and trying to take an advantage fast. Vanilla Nef was a 3-phase fight, and during phase 1 you had to deal with 42 Draconoids with 6 different types of Draconoids. There was almost 1 ad per person in the raid. With the amount of ads, the common strat in phase 1 was to split up into 2 groups with 2 to 3 tanks in each group, so this fight you needed up to 6 tanks. Let's soak that in for one moment. 6 tanks. And I'm going to say it again. Holy shit. 6 tanks. Goodness gracious. This strat is kicking it up a notch, as you would have to AoE the red Draconoid group, assist train the blue Draconoid group. DPS should always be on the black Draconoid unless the blue group was up. AoE the bronze group unless you have the red group up. With the bronze, you would AoE the red group, and the green Draconoids could be dealt with in any way you wanted, as they was the lowest priority on the list. And once all 42 Draconoids was killed, phase 2 would begin with Nefarian landing as a massive dragon with a touch over 2 million life. Now the fun begins, as this black dragon is now chuckling at the incoming strategy of phase 2 and 3. Now begins the tank and spank strat, with you taking him near the throne, as so that someone without the cloak immunity could survive the Shadow Flame AoE that he does on the entire raid. That is right, for this fight you wanted to ensure that everyone had the Onyxia Scale cloak to avoid the fatal dot from the Shadow Flame. Your main tank would have to stance to avoid the fear, have a priest cast Fear Ward on the main tank. And now let's go over the class callouts that happen around every 25 to 35 seconds. If you was a druid, guess what? You was stuck in cat form for the duration of the call, and you will just basically have to stay back and out of the way until the raid call wore off, as being in cat form could lead to you dying from the fear and various abilities. The hunter's range weapon would be instantly broken, so they had to macro and equip a second weapon that they don't use to let it be broken, then switch back to their main weapon. Get shit on, hunters. Now comes one of the most hilarious abilities. The mage would cast Wild Polymorph on random raid members that could not be line of sight nor outranged. If the ice block was up, the mage would simply use ice block to remove the buff, or the priest or pallies would have to be ready to dispel the polymorph players fast, especially the tank. Can you imagine the wipes that must have occurred from the main tank being polymorphed into a giraffe, cow, chicken, and ate fast by Nefarian? Mages could still DPS with this on them, and they should do so. Priest direct heals would place the dot of corrupted healing on their target, and that stacks and cause lots of damage, and even deaths if they are not careful when they have this debuff on them. During this, the priest would just use Renew and wand Nefarian for mana. And note, I even tried this at level 90, and it hits like a truck and killed 2 of us. Paladins would cast Blessing of Protection on Nefarian. When this happened, the Paladins should Judgment of Wisdom on Nefarian, and all casters should melee back mana while he is protected. Don't DPS this, as the tank can't gain any more aggro, just heal and regain mana back until Blessing of Protection falls off. Rogues would be teleported and immobilized near Nefarian. Main tanks just needed to be aware of where the rogues were and adjust the boss so that the rogue was not in danger of dying. I am not thinking that Cataclysm Nefarian is going to have a comeback from this, as Vanilla Nefarian is continuing his strat onslaught, as Shamans would give Nefarian buff totems including Wind Fury and Fire Nova. You just burn the totems down ASAP and don't enter phase 3 with this call up, as the Bone Constructs will receive the buff as well. Now if you had a main tank warrior, this is probably the most problematic call that you faced, as warriors would be stuck in Berserker stance and take an additional 30% damage, which meant you had to heal your ass off on the main tank. And your DPS had to watch their damage, as the main tank would no longer be in defensive stance for extra aggro. Finally, each warlock would have 2 Infernals summoned that would stun and do a small amount of damage to the warlock and anyone around them. Just stand away from everyone for this and AoE the Infernals down. Finally, once you hit phase 3, you had all the constructs rise from the 42 dead Draconoids that you killed in phase 1. The second they rise, you just wanted to ensure that all your AoE was on them the second they get up and take them out ASAP. This fight was as hard on computers as the strategy, and Cataclysm Nefarian is coming in with this strategy, which is a bit underwhelming from what we just saw. Heroic 25-man Cataclysm Nefarian required 3 tanks to complete this encounter. This was also a 3-phase fight, and during phase 1 you only had to deal with Onyxia. Yes, that's right. Cataclysm Nefarian has pulled out all the stops to take this encounter by enlisting the help of an epic dragon, who we have seen 2 times so far in World of Warcraft Vanilla and Wrath of the Lich King. Phase 1, your Onyxia tank will tank her to one side of the room, with her side to the raid to avoid the tail ash. Then the tank would have to turn her back to the raid as the lightning discharge cast. Then reposition Onyxia. This tank would just rinse and repeat. Your second tank would have to pick up Nefarian once he enters the fight and tank him on the opposite side of the room so that they do not buff each other. You had to ensure that you killed Onyxia shortly after Nefarian cast his second Electrocute. The third tank would have to pick up the Bone Constructs and kite them around and away from Nefarian and make sure that they all died in the same position. During phase 2, you had to split up into 3 groups, get on the 3 platforms once the lava had reached them, and interrupt the ad on each of the platforms while the range took down Nefarian. During phase 3, 5 random DPS or heals will get mind controlled, walk into a portal where they would have to press 2 buttons. One places a stacking buff on them, and the other gets them out of the mind control. Just stack as many as you can before you break the mind control once you're at the portal. During phase 3, 2 of the tanks will taunt off of each other on Nefarian, while the third tank always picked up the animated Bone Warriors, kiting them away from Nefarian and the flames. This was a huge DPS race, and no doubt the longest round we have ever had in this series, as Vanilla Nefarian walks away with round number 1 by a large margin, as the precision and heroic Cataclysm strategy was tough. The sheer amount of priorities during the early stages of the game made the strategy of Vanilla Nefarian one of the toughest ones to learn. Stepping back into round number 2, Vanilla Nefarian is looking confident as we look at the most dangerous single target abilities. Nefarian is coming out in this encounter with Cleave and Conical Breath, which if anyone was near the tank when these abilities went off, it was game over for them, as many people would have been one shot from this by not being positioned correctly. Cataclysm Nefarian looks upset losing the first round and looks like he is a bit pissed for letting himself go like he did. I guess good old Onyxia's cooking and loving atmosphere done him in like so many good women do. So remember guys, when you find your significant other, don't let yourself go and stay sharp. Keep your other happy, just as Nefarian has done his lady friend, as we get into the most dangerous single target ability. I kid. This ability is Shadow Flame Breath, which is a frontal cone breath attack that does 54,000 damage every half second and will resurrect any of the animated Bone Warriors it hits. This ability would destroy any non-tank caught in it, just as Vanilla Nefarian. However, it looks like yes, Cataclysm Nefarian has just won this round, tying it up, as the ads resurrected by this ability in the animated Bone Warriors, if they're not killed in the correct spot, Nefarian's position was incorrect, could lead to a wipe fast. Coming into round number 3 with the most dangerous raid-wide damage ability, we are all tied up 1 round to 1, with Vanilla Nefarian firing in with possibly the most deadly raid-wide damage ability ever put into World of Warcraft. This ability was so deadly that if your entire raid did not have the Onyxia Scale Cloak, there would be no point in even doing the boss, as this ability would wipe your raid almost instantly every time. Cataclysm Nefarian has no answer to this raid-wide damage ability, and to be honest, I don't think there is a boss in World of Warcraft that has had a raid-wide damage ability that would require so much preparation to even deal with. How does one go about getting this cloak, you may ask? Well, you will have to go kill Onyxia and have a leather worker turn in the head of Onyxia so they can automatically learn the pattern. Then you had to skin the body of Onyxia to get the scales of Onyxia for the cloak, which required 315 skinning, and the only way during content to get skinning at that level was to get 2 of the 3, Finkel Skinner, Zulian Slicer and a +5 skinning enchant for the gloves. Only then could you get 1 to 4 scales per kill, which meant that the best case scenario would take you about 13 kills of getting 4 scales each time you skinned Onyxia to get enough cloaks for your entire raid. You could stand behind the throne so not to take damage from this ability, but due to the amount of mechanics, this was not plausible for 30 plus people to try to line of sight this ability. Getting back in the action as we head into round number 4 with Vanilla Nefarian up 2 rounds to Cataclysm's Nefarian's 1 round. The DPS difficulty for both encounters was truly pushing and trying during content, as the Cataclysm Nefarian sheer enrage timer was so tight that the only way to even push it was a damage buff that you could stack on yourself while you was mind controlled, which meant that the DPS had to stack the buff close to max every time they was mind controlled, which put them within a second of dying if they did not break the mind control. Then, after they was out, they only had 15 seconds of around 450% extra damage, which meant that they had to get the damage on the correct target, and it was not waste 1 second. Do not waste 1 absolute second of DPS with this damage buff up. Throw on top of that the randomness of the mind control and your best DPS not getting the buff enough meant that guilds had to stack bursty DPS classes for those first kills, along with very high individual performances that had to be near perfect. Looks like Cataclysm Nefarian is not as much of a slouch as I was thinking earlier in this fight. Vanilla Nefarian Phase 1 was one of the most chaotic strategies and target priority AoE priorities that many DPS had seen up to that point. After getting out of the first phase, the next phase was much easier in comparison. However, the DPS had to stay on their toes as they had to be aware of when to throttle their DPS. That's right, guys and gals. To be a good DPS in early World of Warcraft meant know when to blow shit up and know when to slack off and pull low DPS. It was not all about pushing the numbers. Blizzard did bring in an encounter that was about control and not just blowing shit up with a Spine of Deathwing encounter that so many in the raid community loved. So many people hated that encounter due to the DPS not being able to just go balls to the wall blowing shit up. This round is truly going to be a tough one to decide as the DPS requirement was much larger and the precision with the defensives to stay alive and the RNG factor of the mind control, and Vanilla Nefarian with his ever-changing fight depending on the cause meant that every 35 seconds DPS would have to switch their strategy, and this round is coming down to the wire as it is coming down to a draw as this round is just too tight to decide. That leaves the count 2 rounds to Vanilla Nefarian and 1 round to Cataclysm Nefarian and 1 tied round as we head into round number 5. Coming into round number 5 is the tank difficulty that these fights posed and the damage that is going out in the Cataclysm Nefarian fight, with the adds that had to be caught in and positioned off of the bosses will just not stand up to the difficulty that Vanilla Nefarian posed to the 6 tanks. During Phase 1, tanks had the daunting task of keeping their raid alive as the flood of Draconoids. Tanks had to taunt the adds as they came out due to the fact that there was no good AoE threat generator during this time of the game. The non-chromatic Draconoids did not live much past their taunts, and the chromatic Draconoids had to be sunder tanked as they lived much longer. Then once in Phase 2, the different calls made things problematic for the main tank, as when the warrior call came in, the berserker stance would cause the loss of threat and very high damage to the main tank, not to mention having a stance from the fear that Nefarian casts regularly. It looks like we might have our very first vanilla winner, as Vanilla Nefarian is up 3 rounds to 1 round and 1 tied round. Heading into round number 6, Vanilla Nefarian is looking to put an end to this fight as his difficulty to the healers comes in various forms, with the hilarious form, a call to the priests, turning their heals into dots, effectively taking the priest heals out of the fight for the duration of the call. However, the amount of raid-wide constant damage going out in the Cataclysm Nefarian fight was truly difficult encounter to keep up with on heals, and it looks as though, yes, Cataclysm Nefarian hangs in the fight as he wins this round, bringing him back 2 rounds to 3 with 1 tied round. As we head into the last round, Cataclysm Nefarian needs this round to give us our very first tie of the series. And Vanilla Nefarian needs this round to give us our very first vanilla winner of the series. Regardless of who wins, this is going to be a first in the raid battles of World of Warcraft history. It looks like this last round is a no contest as the Phase 2 mechanics actually changed the way the encounter was handled. Every 35 seconds, depending on what calls went out on what class, dictated how you would handle the fight. So having to switch your strategy every 35 seconds and it all being random on what class calls came in made for a very difficult learning curve for the mechanics of this fight. Your very first Vanilla Raid boss winner, Vanilla Nefarian. A very good fight, and this boss has stood the test of time and proves that he truly was a difficult and cutting edge boss. I would love to see this boss in current content with all the same mechanics. The call mechanic in Phase 2 Blizzard has never used again. It would be nice to see that mechanic make a comeback to give us some good times and some funny wipes. And that is all the time we have, so if you disagree, then leave your winner in the comments section below. If you like this video, then give it a like, share, and subscribe to keep up with future content from the channel. Also, if you have suggestions for future raid battles of World of Warcraft history, then leave them in the comments section below, or email me at thewowbreakdown@gmail.com. Have fun, and see you again next time.